So many people are considering moving to the Fargo-Moorhead region, but one of the biggest decisions you need to make when moving here is whether to live in Fargo or Moorhead. This is the second part of a 2-video series where I break down the cost of living in both Fargo and in Moorhead. In this video, I'll be breaking down the cost of living in Fargo, North Dakota, so you understand all you need to know and you can know the true cost of living here before you make your next move. All the information I found through websites is linked in the description below, and if you have any questions, concerns, or anything you want more information on, please feel free to reach out in the comments or in the caption below. As you can see here, Fargo's cost of living score is 90, which is really good. It is a couple points higher than the Moorhead one, as you can see from my other video. And this is nearly 10% lower than the US average, but it is 2% higher than the North Dakota average. And if you didn't know, Fargo is the biggest city in North Dakota, so that's why the housing cost here is a little bit higher compared to everywhere else where it may not be as readily available for all the health, food, childcare, transportation, taxes, all that type of stuff. And that's all what that goes into this score, just so you know. So the number one thing to look at when moving between Fargo and Moorhead is the income tax brackets. Fargo's income tax brackets are a lot better than the Moorhead ones. The North Dakota income tax brackets range from just above 1% to just under 3%. And compared to the Minnesota tax brackets, which is just above 5% to almost 10%, you're paying in taxes. So especially when you're budgeting and you want to look at your income, you have to know how much is going to taxes every year, and that difference in Fargo-Moorhead can be monumental for you. So just know that. And the income tax in Fargo is obviously a lot better than the income tax in Minnesota. But now that we look into the home values, we can see maybe that evens out a little bit. So the median estimated value for a home in Fargo is $350,000. And that is just right around the North Dakota average and the Fargo and Cass County average. As I said before, Fargo's the biggest city in North Dakota, so that's kind of how that fluctuates, and that's good kind of stay the same. But it is lower than the national average of housing, so it is still affordable, and that's what goes back to the affordability score we saw in the beginning. So now let's compare this. By the way, I'm Zachsykorarealtor, real estate agent here in the Fargo-Moorhead and surrounding areas. If you ever have any questions about anything or want to see if making a move isn't the right thing for you, you can schedule yourself right into my calendar with a link in the description below. City of Moorhead, where the median estimated value is just $270,000. And Moorhead is really affordable when comparing it to the rest of the state of Minnesota and comparing it to national. So this is about a 35% jump from down here from Moorhead, the cost of living in Moorhead, all the way up to the cost of living in Minnesota. And that's where Minneapolis and all those bigger metro areas, that's where that number goes way up. But it is still affordable living in Fargo, being around $350,000 when you don't have to pay all those extra income taxes. So now let's look at North Dakota property taxes. The tax rate on property, the kind of average rate around North Dakota is 0.94. It is a little bit higher in the city of Fargo, but that's slightly below the average of the national average of 0.99, but it's considerably lower than the national average in South Dakota, which is 0.08. As I said before, in Fargo, it is a little bit higher with all the development going on and how much it is growing, and all the production and all the construction that's going on. So let's say we have a home valued at around $270,000. We can see the property taxes for that home would be just above $3,200 for the year. So now let's kind of look at some rent costs in the Fargo-Moorhead area. So as you can see, the Fargo and Fargo metro area, comparing those comparing that rent cost, that in Fargo compared to the metro and downtown area is a little bit more expensive, but it's not that much more expensive. So if you're a downtown person and want to live in downtown, then obviously live in downtown. And if you're not maybe a downtown person, then don't, obviously. But these average rents, they're very similar for Fargo and the Fargo metro area. Another thing to mention is how similar they are to Moorhead. If you saw the Moorhead video, you saw that we're nearly identical for the Fargo and Fargo-Moorhead area. That makes Fargo an excellent place to live if you're considering renting or getting an apartment, being that is a lot cheaper than the state of Minnesota on the income tax side, and you won't have to be paying as much income tax, still paying the same amount of rent. And as you can see, that kind of is around the same average value for the whole entire state of North Dakota, considering the fact that Fargo is the biggest city in North Dakota. If you haven't heard me say that enough times already. But this is still a lot more affordable than the whole entire United States average, being nearly $300, $400 cheaper for a studio, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom apartment in Fargo. So this is going to be the cost of living, and this is going to be compared to the national average. And you can see it's a lot lower for a lot of things. And this is something I'm obviously not going to worry about knowing the state average, but this is the national average, which is the thing I want to focus on. So housing, buying, and renting is 16% lower. And this shows that even though Fargo is a little bit more expensive than it is to live in Moorhead, that it is still cheap on a national scale, just not to the same extent that Moorhead is. But you will not have to be paying those high income taxes like you will have to in Moorhead. The monthly utilities, they're 5% lower than the national average. One thing to note when living in the Fargo-Moorhead area is obviously the winters here are very harsh, so you have to be aware of that and be prepared of that. And that's one thing that I'll help you with when you move in, so you know how to prepare for the winter and then can take advantage of that. So obviously those heating costs are going to be a little bit higher, but that is still lower than the national average. Then food is 3% lower. Fargo-Moorhead area is surrounded by a lot of farmland, as I mentioned in the Moorhead video. So it's really easy to get food, and it's readily available. And with that lower cost of living comes lower food costs because you don't need to be paying more for it. But healthcare is 15% higher. To get those health professionals in the Fargo-Moorhead area, they may have a higher overhead, or you may have to pay them more compared to trying to get them to the Minneapolis or the Chicago areas that are a lot bigger. In Fargo-Moorhead's population, it is big, but compared to that Minneapolis and Chicago population, it is not that big. So that's just something to keep in mind of, that is 15% higher than the national average. Transportation, 1% lower. Transportation in Fargo-Moorhead consists of a lot of driving. There is some buses and stuff like that people use, but almost everybody uses driving or carpooling or something like that to get around. And goods and services in Fargo-Moorhead is 8% higher, and this is just due to the fact that there's not too much available in Fargo-Moorhead compared to those big cities. But comparing it to the rest of North Dakota, it is a lot more stuff and a lot more availability, having a lot of people travel to Fargo all the time for shopping or for entertainment or all those types of purposes. In the Fargo-Moorhead area, there's obviously a lot of colleges, so that brings in a lot of people and a lot of entertainment, but it is also just higher on that national average, knowing the fact that all those other bigger cities that have a lot more people than we do here in the Fargo-Moorhead area. So now this is going to be a breakdown of kind of the averages of what you can expect to get in the Fargo area. These expenses are 17% lower than the national average, and the housing prices are 17% lower, as we talked about earlier. The utility prices are 9% lower, and the transportation and bus fares and gas prices are 3% lower on national average. So even though there's a lot more people driving, that average cost, when you look at it that way, it is lower than the national average, yet it may seem expensive on the national average scale because more people are driving. So gas can rate right around $3.24 a gallon, phone bill for $175 a month, energy for almost $180 a month, and this obviously fluctuates in the winter, being higher for those electric heat board and baseboard heats. And the median rent can be just around $1,200 a month, depending on the size of your apartment. Thanks for watching this video where I broke down the cost of living in Fargo, North Dakota. If you have any questions, concerns, or want to see if moving to Fargo or to Moorhead is the right thing for you, feel free to schedule yourself right into my calendar in the description below.